right, so for tonight's program, we have both Dr. Mitzi Williams online and Sheila Thorne is online, and we will soon be getting started with this. And first, I think we're going to have Dr. Williams speak first. And Dr. Williams is founder of the Joy Life Wellness Center, and I'll just give you a quick intro on Sheila Thorne right now, very quick intro. So Sheila Thorne is the president and founder of the Multicultural Healthcare Marketing Company. I'm probably saying that wrong, but you can correct me. So we have our sponsors for tonight's program. Our supporters are Novartis, Genentech, Bristol-Myers, Squibb, and Sandoz. And without further ado, I'm going to let Dr. Williams get started, and we will then have Sheila Thorne, and then we'll do a combined Q&A, I think. Should we do combined or separately?
Absolutely, combined.
Okay, we'll do combined. It'll go that much quicker and smoother, okay? All right, so Dr. Williams, take it away. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Stuart, and happy Tuesday to everybody. I'm Mitzi Williams. I'm a neurologist and MS specialist, and very excited to talk with you guys a little bit about a couple of topics. Stuart always keeps me on my toes. So first, we'll talk a little bit about shared decision-making and goal setting, and then we'll talk a little bit about clinical trials, which is one of my favorite topics. So I think, any conversation we have about shared decision making, right, and how to best get the best out of your healthcare visits and your healthcare team starts with making sure that you have the right team. So when we think about the healthcare team, of course, oftentimes we think about doctors and nurses and specialists and physical therapists, et cetera. But I like this graphic because in the center of the graphic is the individual who is seeing all these people, right? So it says the patient, but it can be the individual with MS, the individual with any chronic disease, or just the person who's going to doctor. But for this purpose, it'll be the person with MS. So it's important to know that you are at the center of your healthcare team. You are the most important piece of your healthcare team because although many of these people may be specialists in their respective fields, you are the best expert on your MS and you are the best expert on your body and the symptoms and issues that you may or may not be having. So first important thing is to remember that you are a part of the team and that your input is important. Let's go back. So when we think about who else is a part of that team, certainly there is the neurologist, who is the person who helps with disease-modifying therapies and other, symptom management. And then depending on what other symptoms you may be having, there may be other specialists that may become a part of your team. So for some people, they may need a physiatrist if they're having difficulty walking or sometimes with pain management. Those who may be dealing with depression or anxiety may need a mental health professional, such as a psychiatrist or a psychologist. Those who may be having bladder and bowel issues may need to see a urologist or a GI medicine specialist, and the list kind of goes on. So really your team is tailored to what type of symptoms you're having or what type of issues you may or may not be having. And I think another extremely important part of that team on the left side of my screen here is your primary care clinician. So all of my patients, whether you are 18 or whether you are 80, need a primary care physician because your neurologist does not want to look in your ears and your nose for that ear infection. That is not our specialty. And then also you still need to get those regular checkups, right? You still need to get those annual physicals. And as we age, we need different screenings for, instance for breast cancer, mammograms or prostate, et cetera, et cetera. And so your primary care physician is really the glue that helps the team stick together, right? So all of the specialists send their information to the primary care physician, and so it's important to have that as a piece of your team, regardless as to how young or old you are or how healthy or unhealthy you were prior to diagnosis. And so I like to talk about that. And then, of course, with your neurologist, sometimes the first neurologist may not be the best one. So, you need somebody who listens to you, who you feel understands to the best of their ability, who you feel like empathizes with you. And if that neurologist that you first encounter is not doing that, then it's okay to seek a second opinion until you find the right fit. So really assembling your healthcare team is the first major piece in making sure that shared decision making goes well. So when we think about treatment and we think about individualized treatment plans, there are a couple of different things that we take into account. And I'm not going to talk specifically about disease-modifying therapies in this talk, but really I just want to focus a little bit more on what are some of the factors that we look at with treatment decisions. And these have really changed over time. So when we talk about personalizing treatment for MS, this slide particularly talks about disease modifying therapy, but really our goal is to have a personalized treatment plan for each individual, right? A piece of that includes disease modifying therapy, but other components of that include lifestyle modification, whether it is diet, exercise, other factors, stress reduction, all of those things. So really our goal is to find a personalized prescription for that individual that's sitting in front of us. And these are some of the things that we take into account. So we take a look at your MS, right? So the disease activity, how active is your MS? How long have you had MS? Do you have what we call favorable or unfavorable prognostic factors, right? Those are things that mean you may be more likely to have a little bit of an easier course with your MS, or you may have more likelihood of having more difficult time. And those things include things like what your MRI looks like, the type of symptoms you had when you were first diagnosed, et cetera. We also look at patient factors, right? And this is something that has come across probably in the past decade or so. I mean, we've always tried to look at these things, but I think it's become increasingly important that we look at you as an individual. Do you have other medical conditions that may interfere with certain medications? What medication would you most likely be able to stick with, right? I always tell people the best medication is one that you can actually take. So it's important to know, if you're deathly afraid of needles, then an injection would not be the right choice for you. You would need another option. And then of course we look at lifestyle, right? Maybe something that's frequent throughout the day may not be a good option for someone who has a really busy or, very variable schedule. And then of course we look at treatment factors. We talk about tolerability, we talk about safety, and how often you have to be monitored. So those are all the things that we take into account, particularly for disease modifying therapy, again, to help you and your healthcare provider come up with the best treatment option for you. So this is just a slide listing some of the disease modifying therapy. As I said, I'm not going to go into any detail about this, but I think the point is that the landscape of treatment of MS has changed drastically in the past 30 years. So for those of you who've ever heard me give a talk, I always say MS was first recognized as a disease in the 1800s in 1868, but we did not have any treatments available for MS until 1993. So it had a very long time to see how people did without treatment, because honestly, there wasn't very much that the medical community could do. And so we've seen an explosion in the different types of treatments. I remember when I first came to the field of MS, there were no pills for MS. And now we have several pills, we have infusions, we have injections, we have high efficacy, all of these different things. And so we have a lot more options for each individual living with disease. So what is shared decision making, right? So this slide talks about the benefits of shared decision making, but what does shared decision making really mean? It means that we've really moved away from this paternalistic thought in medicine where you go to the doctor tells you what to do, and you go home and do it, right? It doesn't work like that, right? And we recognize with multiple sclerosis, which is a chronic disease, it's important, again, for us to sit down and come to an agreement about the best plan for you individually, right? And so shared decision making involves sitting down with your doctor, your family members, if there are other people who participate in your healthcare decisions, and talking about the pros and cons of different therapies or different options, and then coming up with the best plan for you. And these are just some of the benefits of shared decision making. Number one, you participate in that process. So we get a feel for what fits with your lifestyle, what's most important to you, what are some of your preferences or concerns about different therapies, etc. And then for your care team, we get to talk about guidelines and we get to talk about goals. And really the benefits are usually increased satisfaction because you're a part of that process, and improved outcomes because if you are a part of the plan, you're more likely to adhere to or stick to the plan, or if you're having problems with the plan, report that back to your healthcare team. So symptom management, this is one of the ones that's a little bit difficult. And so this is really where it comes in for you to be reporting to your healthcare team, issues and concerns that you're having, right? So symptom management is looking at all the difference that we have the disease modifying therapy as a form of treatment, and then we have symptom management. So looking at things like if you have numbness and tingling, if you have spasticity or tightness in the muscles. There are some symptoms that we have good treatments for, and there are some symptoms that we have virtually no treatments for. But I think one of the things that's most important is that your doctor cannot help with things that you don't talk about. And so this is where really preparation for your doctor's visits comes into play. So I encourage my patients to write down issues that they may have been having since their last visit. I encourage them to keep a little notebook, keep a little calendar, bring family members who may observe symptoms that you may have been having, but maybe have forgotten about, and write those things down and make sure that your concerns are addressed at each visit. You know, as I said, sometimes with symptom management, it winds up like walking a tightrope, like this individual on this graphic here, because some of the medications or treatments that we use for certain symptoms could potentially make other symptoms worse. So for example, if someone has spasticity or tightness in the muscles, many of the muscle relaxant medicines we give can make people sleepy, which may increase fatigue, right? And so it becomes this cycle where you really have to work very closely with your team to try to find that best balance for you. Sometimes the first medication may not work, sometimes the first dose, sometimes we may have to call in other specialists to help manage that symptom. And so that's really where, you know, it's important to have an open line of communication with your healthcare team to make sure that you guys are making the best decision together, and also to note that if you're having trouble, to let someone know so that they can adjust the plan as needed. Goal setting. So I put this slide here kind of as a placeholder. It doesn't have any words on it besides goal setting. But I think that this is important because people need to know that it's important for you to set goals for your doctor's visit, right? Your doctor's visit is not just for you to receive information passively, but to also have an agenda of things that you would like to accomplish and to think about what your priorities are with your treatment overall, right? And so I think that once people get through the initial shock of diagnosis and getting on medication, this is a really important point to know that it's okay for you to have goals that you'd like to accomplish. You sit down with your physician to see which are maybe a little bit more realistic than others, but try to accomplish those things together. So having that agenda and having those goals is important, and having that, you know, those list of concerns for every visit is also important as well. All right, and then the last piece, so, you know, I always talk about treatment as a 4-layer cake because I like cake. And so the last piece of the cake is lifestyle modification. And this has really been coming to the forefront in the field of MS because now that we have treatments that are more effective, many of us are able to focus more on things like lifestyle modification and activities that improve your brain health. Things like physical activity are really being studied as a way to increase our neurologic reserve, so that can help combat some of the progression that may happen with MS. Also making sure you control your other medical conditions. People with MS can have strokes if they have high blood pressure and high cholesterol that is not controlled. People can develop peripheral neuropathy from diabetes that is uncontrolled. So making sure you're working with that primary care physician to control those other medical conditions and being checked regularly for those is also extremely important. Having a healthy, well-balanced diet, whatever that looks like for you, is also important. Many people ask about specific diets, and there's not a specific diet that has been known across the board to treat or improve MS, but certainly many people have found paths, whether it is, you know, specific diets such as, you know, paleo diet or Mediterranean diet, etc., limiting calories, working with a nutritionist. You know, all of these are different ways to help modify the diet to help improve overall lifestyle. Certainly stopping smoking, if that's a habit, is important because smoking does increase the progression or the transition from relapsing MS to progressive disease, and also can worsen the course of disease. And limiting alcohol intake, not necessarily because alcohol affects MS directly, but certainly we want your liver to be intact because many of the medications you take are metabolized by the liver, and we don't want your liver shot from drinking too much alcohol. All right, and finally, this is kind of my final thought on this section, is to really take control of your health. So it's important to learn about your diagnosis. Coming to talks like these, Stuart does so much great programming with information about different aspects of MS. Learning as much as you can. Understanding your treatment is important. Those lifestyle behaviors such as a healthy diet and exercise, making sure you talk to your team if you're having questions. Finding your support system is extremely important, and then asking for help when you need it. And of course, one of my favorite phrases is remembering that you are your own best advocate. So we'll move on to the next section where we talk a little bit more about research. And we talked about this last time, but I'm not going to go into the same amount of detail, but we'll just kind of give an overview, and then I'll give it over to Sheila. So why should you participate in research? Next slide. So I think it's important to recognize that research is one of the primary ways that we learn about MS in general. We learn about different types of MS. We learn about different people's MS. We learn about different risk factors for MS, as well as different things that affect how people do long term. So research is really the primary vehicle that we have to take that individual experience and make broader guidelines or suggestions so that those who may not have as many patients with MS or who may be new to MS or learning can learn how to effectively treat the condition. So I think it's important to recognize that there are many underserved communities. So I primarily do a lot of work focused on ethnic minoritized groups, but certainly in the field of MS, this is a slide that looks more at just kind of broadly what are underserved communities. They can be people who have lower socioeconomic status, those who are in rural populations, which Stuart really has a heart for reaching people in rural populations with MS views and news. Certainly people of color, those who identify as LGBTQIA, also older patients. And then, one of the reasons looking at underserved communities is important is because oftentimes there are higher mortality rates, there may be higher rates of disease or more severity, as well as more cost. Particularly for MS, underserved communities include rural communities who may not have access to MS specialists or even to neurologists, general neurologists. Also, older patients. And so in most of our research trial, they go up to the age of 55. Now, let me be clear that 55 is not old, but certainly for the purpose of our clinical trials and the information that we have concerning MS, we really don't have a lot of information in people over 55. Some of our newer studies are looking at people over the age of 65, but I've got patients in their 80s with MS, and we virtually have very little to no information on what we should do in terms of treatment and how MS behaves in that age group. So it's important for us to participate in research because we need everyone's input so that we can understand the disease as a whole. Socioeconomic factors. So when there are some groups that do more poorly than others, for instance, I've talked multiple times about MS in the Black community, for instance, or MS in the Hispanic community, and how there may be worse outcomes. But research helps us to understand, are these worse outcomes because of changes in the immune system or underlying genetic factors that may be more common in some populations? Or is it more because of what we call social determinants of health, someone's access to health care, their access to competent health care or culturally competent health care? Is it because of the neighborhood they live in or their transportation? Are there other systemic barriers such as bias that may be leading to poor outcomes? And so research helps us to really tease out some of those issues to better understand why we see MS behaving in certain populations in different ways. So just a little bit about clinical trials. So I'm, again, not going to go into a lot of detail about clinical trials specifically, but when we think about clinical trials, which is one of the areas where we really have very low representation of many groups, including those over the age of 55, as well as the pediatric population is also an underserved population with MS, as well as those who are from ethnic minoritized groups. When we look at clinical trials, these are just kind of the phases of research. Most people come into research at phase 3. Right. So the reason that I list this is that it's important to recognize that by the time a trial makes it to most clinics, which is when they're in phase 3 trials or even phase 4, there have been several phases where we've looked at safety, where there has been a look at side effects, as well as the effectiveness of the therapy. So it is not as if the medicine goes from preclinical, meaning in animal models or in a test tube, straight to 3,000 people, so there are multiple studies that are done prior to the phase 3 studies that tell us about safety and efficacy. And then there are multiple policies and procedures in place to ensure the safety of clinical trial participants to the best of our ability. So the typical process for someone to be involved in a research study, there is what we call informed consent. Usually it's a long document that tells you about the pros and cons of the study and what will be done. Then there's screening to determine if you are eligible for the study. And then often you will be randomized or put into different groups. And then you will participate in the study activities, have follow-up, and then the results will be published. And this is the way that it works, not just for clinical trials, but also for other studies where we look at, for instance, exercise or look at diet or other non-medication interventions for conditions such as multiple sclerosis. So I think a couple of thoughts that I want to leave people with is that regardless as to what type of research you participate in, it's important to know that you have rights as a research participant. And so just because you participate in research or agree to be in a study does not mean that somehow you've signed your whole life away and there's nothing you can do. You have the right to be fully informed about the study, what it's supposed to accomplish, what are the pros and cons, what are the other safety options, what are other available treatment options for that condition. Also, it's important to know you can ask questions. You can take time to talk to your family and talk back with your healthcare providers. You don't have to make a decision on the spot. And if at some point you become uncomfortable, you can leave the study at any time. And so I think that's really important. Obviously, when people enroll in studies, we don't want them to leave if at all possible. But it's important to know for you that if something happens, you can leave that study. And so it's not as if you're signing on the dotted line and there's nothing else that you can do or no other decisions you can make if something, doesn't go as planned or, you need to exit a study. Again, clinical trials are just one way to participate in research, but they may not be for everybody, right? And so other types of ways you can participate in research are looking at non-drug studies. There are studies focused on diet, exercise, lifestyle modification, mindfulness, meditation, all of these things. There are survey studies where we're trying to learn about risk factors and health behaviors. There are specific registries for populations such as ARMS, the Alliance for Research in Hispanic Multiple Sclerosis. There's also NAMSAR, the National African American MS Registry, and there are many different registries, biobanks, and other communities. An iConquer MS is a patient-powered research organization that focuses on topics that people living with MS want to know about and tries to create studies focused on those. Again, there's a wide variety of different studies. If you don't meet the criteria for a clinical trial, there are different ways for you to get involved in clinical research. All right, and then finally, last two slides, this is how you connect with me. I am the Nerdy Neurologist, and we can go to the last one. It says that we can ask questions, but I think I'm going to pause and hand it back over to Stuart. I end every talk with the same quote: all I need is peace, love, and a freaking cure for multiple sclerosis. Thank you guys so much. I will hand it back over to Stuart, and I think we're going to do a combined Q&A at the end of Sheila's presentation. Thank you so much for inviting me, Stu.
Thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in many other programs as we head into 2024. But for right now, yes, we're going to give it over to Sheila Thorne, and then we will come back for a combined Q&A. It'll probably be a short Q&A, but it'll still be a combined Q&A. So Sheila Thorne, as I said earlier, she is the president and CEO of the Multicultural Healthcare Marketing Group. And Sheila, take it away.
Thank you, Stuart. And thank you so much, Stuart, for keeping diversity as part of your series of information to your listeners and to your viewers. It's very, very near and dear to my heart, as you know, when we first met, Stuart, and I applaud you for keeping it on the radar screen. And Dr. Williams, what can I say? I am always in awe and always excited when I hear you present. I always learn something new. So thank you for what you do. Go back to the first slide, please, Bill. I think it's important that I give you context, and that's what this presentation is about. Clearly, race is a very toxic conversation with many people. It's an uncomfortable conversation, but based on what Dr. Williams shared with us, we have to think about the context of how people get care, when they get care, and from whom they get care. And that will determine to a large degree the quality of their outcomes. Disease does not exist in a vacuum, but in a socio-cultural community context. And that context has a tremendous amount to do to drive behavior. In the last decade, there's been a lot of talk about the patient voice and the patient journey. Well, I'm here to tell you, folks, that if you are of color, if you are of African, Hispanic, Asian, or Native American descent, your patient journey is decidedly different from those who are so-called in the mainstream. And physicians and patient advocates, researchers must acknowledge those differences if they're ever going to close the gap in health disparities and strive for health equity. First and foremost, we must never forget, we are a country of immigrants. Next slide, or hit the button again, Bill. And clearly, this country of immigrants means that we all came from someplace else. No one here has been here like Native Americans or the indigenous populations. So don't forget that. Sometimes people forget that they've come here from someplace else. Of the 210 countries in the world, every one of them has somebody living in America. And their journey, their life experience is different. Next slide, please. If you are someone of African descent, like my generation and my people, you did not come here by choice. And that particular historic phenomenon has pervasively and persistently tailored and shaped how people of African descent have achieved healthcare. When you come here as a slave, that stigma stays with you and all of the negatives that go along with that. So every immigrant group has come here, has educated, has gotten money, has moved up in the social ranks. African Americans have not moved that quickly, and there are reasons why. Next slide, please. But the real wake-up call was the Census 2010, when we saw for the first time that there's a diversity explosion in America. We are more multicultural, we are more diverse than ever before, not just in urban centers, but in rural centers and in suburbs as well. Next slide, please. So this wake-up call means that we've got to do things differently. And then, of course, here's another phenomenon that has occurred globally. This family, the father is from Australia, the mother is Jamaican. They had 3 children, and then they had twins. So these beautiful young girls, what race are they? Well, whatever they say they are. You can't go by physical appearance. You go by self-identification, especially for clinical research, as well as how people view and see themselves. Next slide. If you want to learn more about how this phenomenon is changing the dynamics of the world, you might want to get this issue of National Geographic, which specifically talks about this happening around the world. That changes the dynamic of how people are viewed. It's not just what you look like, it's where you've come from. Next slide, please. But the most staggering data, the most staggering number, the most staggering takeaway from the US Census is that the white population is shrinking. For the first time since the census started being taken in 1790, there are 5% less people who identify themselves in America as white. Next slide. So if you haven't changed your dynamic of how you reach out to these populations, how you educate, how you connect with these populations, you're missing a huge opportunity. Before the middle of this century, 1 out of every 2 Americans will be a person of color or a person of color speaks Spanish. So does race matter? You bet it does. Next slide, please. Many people have said, we want a colorblind society. I don't see color. I only see people. Well, yes, you do see color. Next slide, please. And if you insist upon wanting this to be a colorblind society and you think that means you're not racist, it means just the opposite. If you deny race, if you don't acknowledge difference, it's like you've shut down the discussion and the conversation about how to do a better job of connecting and living together and engaging these populations. So clearly you do see color, acknowledge it, address it, celebrate it, and act accordingly. Next slide, please. But as a result of COVID-19 and the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many others, they've come new iterations of racism to the fore. Systemic racism, structural racism, institutional racism. Well, they're all variations on the same theme. That's being prejudiced, that's being discriminatory, and that's being exclusive and not inclusive. Next slide, please. So when you look at pandemics, racism is a pandemic. That's something we've been dealing with in this country for far too long. Certainly for 400 years that people of African descent have been here, 500 years that Hispanic Americans have been here, and of course Native Americans were here long before all of us. Next slide. But when you look at disease and you look at treatment and you look at diagnosis and outcomes and health disparities come to the fore, many times it has been dismissed as, oh, those people don't have insurance, oh, they're poor. Well, those two are very important components of how people get health care and how they treat and manage health care. But there's a lot of other stuff going on that's under the radar screen that are the significant factors that drive health behavior. Once you acknowledge those things and try to mitigate those changes, hopefully we'll improve health outcomes for all Americans, be it multiple sclerosis, cardiovascular disease, respiratory disease, cancer, HIV and AIDS. Those are all still pandemics in our community because they have not gone away and disproportionately affect people of color. Next slide. This statement from the Kaiser Family Foundation says it all. Despite significant advances in civil rights, race remains a significant factor in determining whether an individual receives care, whether an individual receives high quality care, and in determining health outcomes. Well, as MS Views and News has given me the opportunity, we've got to change that. We've got to make sure that all Americans receive affordable, equitable, quality, culturally competent health care. So race matters and culture counts. Next slide. And culture is really what tells people how to behave, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what's inappropriate. You learn that from your family. You learn that from your community, and that will vary. That's information that's shared. And so if a healthcare professional or a healthcare institution doesn't not acknowledge that cultural context, they'll miss important opportunities to better engage with the patient, as Dr. Williams talked about the clinical encounter, how to talk to those patients, even if it's in English or another language. So culture is what drives behavior, whether you just landed at JFK or your ancestors came over on the slave ships. Culture counts. Next slide. And now we have a new element to this whole discussion, and that's JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And that's civil rights language. That means that healthcare, quality healthcare, is not a privilege, it's a civil right. So it goes beyond just doing the right thing and making nice to people who don't look like you, come from where you come from, or look the way you look. So all of this is something that we have to choose to address, not ignore, as if it were the pink elephant in the room. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, education is what we need, not training. Training is transactional. That's what most of our HR professionals do. And that's important for compliance, for workforce diversity, all of that. What I do and what I've done for the past 30 years is diversity education. Why these groups behave they do, how we can better address these in a culturally specific way. That's transformative. And if you educate yourself in diversity, you will behave differently. You will observe differently. You will respond and act differently. Next slide. Just keep punching the buzzer, Bill, the ends. We look at diversity across the decades, and we've made a modicum of success. We started in 1985 when we declared diversity disparities a real problem. We have the Office of Minority Health. We have state offices of minority health. We've got a lot of things we've put in place, but we haven't nearly made enough progress in this area, and people of color still do not receive biomedical care to the same quality across the board. That's what we have to change and focus on, and that's about race. Next slide. The history of our country, unfortunately, is a dark history. Many like to dismiss it. Many like to censor it, ban information, try to cancel culture. But when you have this kind of legacy, and people of color have seen this from the 20s and 30s up to the present, not only with race and ethnicity, but with religion, that's a heavy burden in order to overcome. These groups are pre-wired before they come into you. They don't expect you to welcome them, embrace them, or treat them properly. You've got to get over that hurdle before you even talk about healthcare. Next slide. And Dr. Phyllis Jones, Kamara Phyllis Jones, a good friend, who's written up much in the literature, really hits the nail. Racism is about power. It's about what group can take away from you or give you solely based on the way you look. And that's the social interpretation of how we look. So racism is definitely insidious, it's pervasive, and many people aren't even aware that they are practicing racist behavior or racist thoughts, even though they may not be called racist. That's the context in which Dr. Williams is talking about patients that have MS who need to go for care. That's the power that the mainstream community has over people of color. Next slide. And stress, along with that racism, is what's making those who have chronic disease suffer even more. And that chronic stress leads to a lot of ancillary conditions that exacerbate the conditions that people deal with. And that's something that anyone with a chronic disease has to minimize, that stress. Next slide. And so much so that they have to minimize it that it's a whole new segment in psychiatry, race-based traumatic stress, unique physiological, psychological, and emotional distress that Black, Indigenous, and people of color suffer as a result of racism and discrimination. And that's a whole new segment. One psychiatrist that I know said that there are more people of color walking around every day with post-traumatic stress disorder who've never been on a battlefield because of daily encounters with racism and discrimination in school, at work, when you travel, and it's certainly in healthcare. Next slide.
American, and all of Kevin's neighbors are white. Because Jamal's school district is mostly funded by property taxes, his school is not very well funded. His classrooms are overcrowded, his teachers are underpaid, and he doesn't have access to high-quality tutors or extracurricular activities. Kevin's school district is also funded by property taxes, so his school is very well funded. His classrooms are never crowded, his teachers are very well paid, and he has access to high-quality tutors and lots of extracurricular activities. Kevin and Jamal live only a few streets away from each other. So how come they're growing up in such different worlds with such different opportunities for success? The answer has to do with America's history of systemic racism. To understand it better, let's look at what life was like for Kevin and Jamal's grandparents. Decades after the Civil War, many government agencies started to draw maps dividing cities into sections that were either desirable or undesirable for investment. This practice was called redlining, and it usually blocked off entire Black neighborhoods from access to private and public investment. Banks and insurance companies used these maps for decades to deny Black people loans and other services based purely on race. Historically speaking, owning a home and getting a college education is the easiest way for an American family to build wealth. But when Jamal's grandparents wanted to buy a house, the banks refused because they lived in a neighborhood that was redlined. So Jamal's grandparents were not able to buy a home, and because colleges could prevent them from attending through legal segregation, their options for higher education were really scarce. Kevin's grandparents, on the other hand, got a low-interest loan to buy their first house and got accepted into a handful of top universities, which traditionally only accepted white students. This opened up a wealth of opportunities that they were able to pass on to their kids and grandkids. Even as late as the 1980s, an investigation into the Atlanta real estate market showed that banks were more willing to lend to low-income white families than to middle or upper-income African-American families. As a result, today, for every $100 of wealth held by a white family, Black families have $5.04. A 2017 study confirms that redlining is still affecting home values in major cities like Chicago today. This explains how Kevin and Jamal inherited vastly different circumstances. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. A big part of systemic racism is implicit bias. These are prejudices in society that people are not aware that they have. Let's go back to Kevin and Jamal. Against all odds, Jamal manages to be the only student from his high school to get accepted into a great university, the same one that Kevin and his high school friends are attending. But after Kevin and Jamal both graduate, Jamal notices that his resume isn't drawing as much interest as Kevin's, even though they graduated from the same program with the exact same GPA. Unfortunately for Jamal, studies show that resumes with white-sounding names get twice as many callbacks as identical resumes with Black-sounding names. Implicit bias is one of the reasons why the Black unemployment rate is twice the rate of white unemployment, even among college graduates today. You can see evidence of systemic racism in every area of life. The disparities in family wealth, incarceration rates, political representation, and education are all examples of systemic racism. Unfortunately, the biggest challenge with systemic racism is that there's no single person or entity responsible for it, which makes it very hard to solve. So what can you do? The first thing you can do is work towards becoming more aware of your own implicit biases. What are some prejudices that you might hold that you're not aware of? Second, let's acknowledge that the consequences of slavery and Jim Crow laws are still affecting access to opportunity today. As a result, we should support systemic changes that create more equal opportunities for everyone. Increasing public school funding and making it independent from property taxes would be a great start so that poor and wealthy districts can receive equal access to resources. Systemic problems require systemic solutions. Luckily, we're all part of the system, which means that we all have a role to play in making it better. Peace.
So you see here that systemic racism is deep-rooted, and as a result, trust is deep-rooted as well. Mistrust, distrust of not only government, the system, financial system, banking system, educational system, but healthcare. Next slide. And these are not just about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. They're not just about major incidences of racism, but daily microaggressions that these groups have to endure and decide whether to challenge on a daily basis, even in the healthcare system. Next slide. So where are you? Where is your team? Are you culturally conscious? Are you culturally educated? If you're living with multiple sclerosis or with another chronic disease, have you received the kind of care that you deserve? Have you become your own advocate and decided to take charge and control of your health, as Dr. Williams suggested? Yes, these situations are insurmountable to some degree, or at least they appear to be such, but it's up to each one of us to take charge and control of our health and hopefully go from cultural destructiveness in our behavior and thoughts to cultural proficiency. Next slide. And in my mind, it's about cultural humility, even before cultural competency. Are you willing? Are you open to difference? People who look different, talk different, act different, have a different way of looking at the world. It's not good or bad, it's just different. Next slide. And so there's a moral imperative for us to make sure each one of us can achieve health equity. Each one of us can strive to get our most optimal health, and race and culture figure into that dynamic. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said this in 1966. Of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and the most inhuman because it often results in physical death. If we're all Americans, we all deserve quality, affordable, culturally competent, equitable healthcare. So that's the imperative from a clinical perspective, from a moral perspective, and from a physical perspective. Next slide. And that's what all of us are entitled to do. It is definitely a civil right. I'm going to share with you now a very uplifting song, and I don't want you to be depressed. I want you to be encouraged by the opportunities that Dr. Williams and Stuart Schlossman and MS Views and News is presenting to you. Take charge. Be sure that you can be not color blind, but color brave. Let's listen to this song that's often sung in Black communities at churches and at community events, and it speaks to the resilience of not only this group, but it can also be said of others.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies.
Let it
resound.
Let it resound.
Loud as the rolling sea.
I like this part right here. Come on.
Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on.
Let us march on.
Till victory is won.
Now we add a little something to it. Just to encourage you. We're gonna take it to church later. Let's go.
We'll keep marching, fighting till the victory is won.
To all my brothers out there.
Hold your head up, brother, till the victory is won.
To all my sisters in the struggle.
Keep believing, sister, till the victory
Till that day. Hey.
Let us march on
To victory.
till victory is won. Is won.
So Stuart, Dr. Williams, honored to be with you, honored to be a part of this conversation, and honored to put into context what striving for control of your condition, multiple sclerosis, is going to mean. The cultural context, because disease does not exist in a vacuum. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Again, both of you were excellent, and there's so much to know about this that, you know, I have a few questions for you all, and some were by me and some were that were sent to me, but I would like you both to answer them. I mean, I think that that's fair. I think you both can answer them. And, you know, with regard to like the clinical trials, learning which group, okay, so this is probably Dr. Williams. How do people learn? Is it possible for somebody to learn which control group that they're to be put in or that they are in once they have clinical trials? I mean, when they do the trials.
So that's a great question. So many of our large clinical trials, ones that are looking at new medications, for instance, or procedures, are what we call double-blinded and randomized. So randomized means that when you walk in and if you go through the process and you're eligible for the study, that it is random how you are put into one treatment group versus the other. And double blind means that nobody really knows, you know, the doctors who are the treating physicians and those who are other participants in the study don't know which group that you're in. So for most of our large phase 3 trials, there's not a way to know ahead of time which group or treatment group you will be put in. Now, for some other trials, there are some trials that are what we call open label studies. So in that instance, it may be a medication that is already approved, and maybe the company is looking at side effects, or maybe an investigator at a site is looking at certain side effects or other issues. In that case, if it is an open label study, then you know what group you'll be put into. But for most of the trials that are randomized, even for some that do like exercise or other interventions, you still may be randomized to, let's say, a workout, a one, and then a workout plus something else. So for the ones that are randomized, you won't know ahead of time, but if it's something that's open label, then that means you would know what group you'll be in. Usually there's only one group if it's an open label trial.
Okay, thank you for that. Everybody that's online, if you have a question, you have to ask. I can't read your mind, and you need to just type it in, okay? All right, so going further with clinical trials, though.
Can I add something to that?
Absolutely, absolutely. Please go for it.
She answered it absolutely perfectly. But in my work recruiting people of color for clinical trials, you must tell them these things up front.
Well, that's where I'm heading to.
Well, good.
That's
All
where
right.
I'm heading to right now, all right?
Great minds
So-
think alike.
So exactly. So, you know, in this day and age, as you were even saying about the majorities versus the minorities right now, how do we wake up the people of color to, in each community, to get them more involved, especially in clinical trials? I mean, if they keep being afraid to do them, there are not going to be any more clinical trials because there aren't enough white people anymore to do these, you know, and to make it so that way you're going to get true results for the majority. You can't take from the minority. The new minority is me. It's people that look like me. All right. And I know this. And then on top of it, there's the religious aspects, and we become even more the minority these days. All right. And the persecuted, unfortunately.
Yes.
And so, you know, it's how do we find a way to get people of color to be less resistant to doing these trials?
I'll take a stab at that.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
You go for that one, Sheila.
Educate, educate, educate in as many different
It's
ways.
not working.
No, it is working. It is working, Stuart. It's certainly working better now than it was perhaps 10, 15 years ago because of COVID.
Yes.
People saw people dropping dead on a daily basis, thousands from COVID. Then they saw the vaccine and people were living. So those are the kinds of things that say to people, well, maybe I should reconsider this. But when I say education, I don't mean brochures. I don't mean radio commercials.
I don't mean either.
I mean boots on the ground, churches,
Right.
schools, community-based organizations, over and over again. This trust runs deep, and it's for good reason. Okay, so you can't ignore the reluctance and resistance and say, well, if you don't do it, you're not going to get the right care or it's not be safe. You've got to do it over and over and over again. And I am seeing a difference. Most of the time, people of color are not hard to reach. They're hardly reached. Nobody asks them. More people of color are willing to volunteer than you think.
So I'll only use it, and I know Dr. Williams, you want to say something as well, but I'm going to say this. We have been advertising this program for weeks and giving people a reason to be online to watch this. And I would have expected easily over 100 people to be online watching this, but we don't have that. And this was tagged to many people who are active, very active on social media, and they're not online tonight. And, you know, I'm going to make sure that I pound them that they have to listen to the recording. They have to listen. They have to get more involved. I mean, you know, I again, it's how do we get more leaders out there? And there are plenty of social media leaders, okay, who are people of color that unless they're involved, they can't get the people who follow them to be involved.
Well, I think a couple of different things, right? So, you know, in terms of how people view or consume information, you know, I have found I do a lot of these seminars, you know, for you, I do my own podcast. You know, I find that people don't consume things live as much as they did, let's say, at the height of the pandemic. Now, sometimes if it's like a really, really hot button topic, you might get, you know, a ton of people on if you're talking about something that just happened yesterday, you know, like, or, you know, or a new law that came out or something, you know. But when we talk about topics that maybe people have heard of in different venues or maybe heard of through this avenue, you know, in previous talks that we've done, I find that many people do view things after the fact. So I wouldn't take that as a discouragement, you know, that people won't eventually consume the information. I just find that people just, they outside. You know what I mean? They're not home or they're eating dinner, you know, or you saw my daughter come and hang out at the top of the top, you know what I mean? So, I would say people are consuming the information after the fact. And then to Sheila's point, you know, again, I think the other piece of the way we renovate research and get more people involved is that we have to make it accessible. Right now, for you to be in a clinical trial, you have to be fairly able-bodied and fairly well off, right? Because you have to miss multiple visits, right? For qualifying, for, you know, eligibility. If there's an intervention, you may have to get MRIs every couple months. You may have to get a treatment or an infusion some treatment infusions for some conditions in the neurologic sphere are every 2 weeks, right? And so who has that amount of time to take off and the ability to get transported back and forth and back and forth? You know, you really kind of have to be well off and kind of rich to be in a study right now, you know, and to be able to get back and forth with access, you know, even if you're, let's say, not working, so we as a scientific community, so certainly these communities, we definitely need to build trust, but we have to make it accessible. Like I couldn't be in a research study right now because I got to work. I mean, you know, and so it is. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
So how do we bring the clinical trials to the neighborhoods where they need to be brought? Okay, so a clinical trial can be set up in a clinic in East Point, okay, or in College Park, okay, or it could be set up in a place in Birmingham or New York City. They are in New York City, but in certain areas of New York City where you have your redlinings, okay, where you know. Why can't the trials be brought into these other areas? And again, it's not just there either. It's also in other areas. It could be into, you know, Spanish Harlem or Miami. You know, I mean, so you may not have it actually exist in Miami. It may be in Fort Lauderdale, but why can't it get into Miami where primarily there are people of Latin descent, you know, or you know, Hispanic descent? That
now you're asking the right question. Now you're asking
Thank
the right.
you.
Yeah.
I'll let you start with that one, Sheila.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I have closed down beauty salons on a Saturday afternoon with the permission of the owner for an hour to talk about breast cancer. You know, you had a little wine, you know, soft drinks, a little cheese, and we talked about that for an hour. I've done it in barbershops. I've done it in bodegas. I've done it in housing projects. You hit the point on the head. Go where the people are.
Right.
And they're not going to come to you on this topic.
That's
And don't
correct.
say it's about clinical trials. Say it's about a wellness conversation. Say it's about healthy children, healthy families, healthy elders. Couch it differently so people don't feel like they're being criticized or targeted. And so clearly it's not why don't they do it, is where the resources and who is going to do it. Because most of the people who can do it don't look like me and Dr. Williams.
Right. And I think the other piece,
Sure.
Stuart, if I may interject, is that, again, realize that this is a multifactorial problem, right? So, you know, again, when I try to frame the conversation, we certainly talk about distrust, we talk about all those things, but I also, you know, when we talk about lack of participation, sometimes I feel like it puts the onus on the person. Like the only problem is they don't want to be in a study and that's why they're not in a study, right? But as you see, we've had conversations about, okay, educating people about where to find out about the studies. Number two, making the studies accessible so it doesn't cost you $1 million and 50 days off of work with
Right.
no compensation to be in a study. Number three is where the studies are conducted depends largely on the people or the companies that are conducting the studies. And so people want the path of least resistance. So if there is a place where you know everything is set up like a machine, you can predict how long it's going to take to get this done. You can predict they're absolutely going to get you 10 participants, right? Or 20 participants or whatever. They're going to meet their quota because they know what they're doing. They have experienced staff. Most people are likely going to try to go for those sites versus, let's say, an investigator who's in the community who may not have as much experience with doing trials. It takes an investment, right? So it's not just investment in educating people, it's investment in researchers and investigators that are part of these communities, right? Who may not have run 30 clinical trials or don't have 50 staff members who have everything memorized and down to a science, you know. And so the other piece is that the companies have to look at places and investigators who are not in your traditional large academic centers who are giving us the same results and the same populations that we've had in all the studies in the past.
And Dr.
Right,
Williams, what about the diagnostic tests that you have to go through before you even enter the trial? 4 to 6 weeks.
Absolutely.
And at the end of that trial,
Absolutely.
you know what? Thanks for stepping up. You're not eligible. And they go away.
Exactly.
Who supports
Exactly.
that cost? You know, not to mention that
Right.
40-page informed consent document that's not even in Spanish
And nobody
that
understands.
you've got to sign. I mean, come on. It's systemic, Stuart. It's systemic. It's not just the patient.
I understand that. So that goes on to the next question. You're like feeding right into each of these that I've got put together for you because I really want to help. I really
Yeah.
want to help
Yeah.
break down barriers. All right. It's not just for people of color, it's for Caucasians or white people or whatever you want to call us. You know, it's for people who live in rural America that just don't have the those that are ill cannot drive. You know, and
Exactly.
so how do they get to where need to be gotten also to be involved? I know a lot of people that live in rural America that would love to be involved with these trials. Also, they would
Yeah.
love to be able to just see a good doctor, but they can't
Yeah.
do that either. You know,
Yeah.
and so they get stuck in the true donut hole of life, and they're swirling around and listening to doctors that don't even talk to them correctly about what's wrong with them. So, you know, we see this all the time.
Absolutely.
But so how do we get people more interested for those that even can afford to be involved with the studies that don't actually have enough knowledge of it, but may want to be part of it? And how do we make them more, how do we get them more interested in it? How do we get them more aware of what's going on to then be interested in being part of the study?
So I think, you know, one thing that, you know, myself and some of my colleagues have been thinking about is, you know, we need easier ways for people to find out about trials. So one of the main sites that we send people to is clinicaltrials.gov. And although it has a wealth of information, it is very difficult to navigate and understand, even for me as a scientist. Like, I go on and I'm like, I don't know what 36B3.78 means. And so we need some type of search engine where somebody can put in their name, put in their condition and where they live, and all the trials that are there. I mean, I know that it can be created, right?
It's actually done. It's actually already done.
So then we need to be directing people to that type of site, right? Where they can look up their condition, and then they'll be able to, see what's going on in their area. But I think that's one way, directing people to sites or making it easy for people to find out about trials.
Right. There are a few companies out there that, like an Antidote, who have something, and they already have all your information. So if you're looking for trials specifically about multiple sclerosis, you can go onto their site, get registered, and all the MS trials in the area will come up. But I think even more so than that, I think the pharmaceutical companies who have all the money should be the ones that are making these sites available, making the portals available for the people to be able to get more involved, to have navigators like the National Multiple Sclerosis Society has, but for the pharmaceutical companies to actually do that, so people can call them. It doesn't matter that a person is on their medication or not. They should be there just to be there to direct the people where to go to.
Totally support what you're saying. The clinical research organizations, the CROs, the people that pharmaceutical sponsors hire to do the recruitment have to be educated culturally, because they don't always know where to go and how to do what you're suggesting, Stuart. But you're spot on. You're spot on. It's got to be more user-friendly and certainly more frequent.
Right. Well, we should take on new roles in life, the three of us, and get out there and start conquering all this stuff. All right, because we could leave our names
together. We can solve it.
We can leave our names in a true good space if we can pull this one off. Right. Racism has changed in many areas around the country. Unfortunately, it has changed greatly in the last few months. And, it's certain areas of the country, people right now are just feeling very unsafe in going to. And hopefully this gets resolved soon, too. But why is there so much systemic racism in the schools? This I don't understand.
Well, I
I'll
think
let you take that one, Sheila.
I'm sorry, Dr. Williams.
I said I'll let you take that one. I'll let you start off with that one.
The why questions are always challenging, but I think these things have unfortunately been woven in the fabric of how our country operates. And that's not to say we aren't in a great country, because we are. But these things have been embedded so long ago that it's hard to uproot it and start all over again. Education, healthcare professionals, those are the heroes in our community. They got in the business to help people, to educate people, to keep people well. You wouldn't think that they would be not involved in what we're talking about today, but they're human, okay? The fact that they're doctors and nurses and educators doesn't mean that they're exempt from the same racist behavior and influences that we all are. It's a microcosm of society.
Absolutely.
Right. I would think that with all the entertainers out there, whether it be sport or on film, that more of a point could be made as well. I think that the clinical trials should be mentioned on television, where they're not really mentioned at all. I mean, it goes from actually one disease state to another with the organizations that are involved in the different disease states that are unfortunately the only ones, or the primary ones, that are mentioning clinical trials to their constituents, rather than this getting on television and having a larger audience. Why do we only see all the ads for the drugs that are already out there and not the drugs to be out there?
We're in a space that's uncomfortable for most people, especially at this time in the history of our country. You mentioned that word, it's like touching the third rail in a train. I mean, everybody gets real quiet. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to discuss it. And unfortunately, that's what we're dealing with. I think Dr. Williams, you, myself, and others like us have been talking this for decades. We just have to keep speaking truth to power and keep putting it on the table. Comfort the afflicted, but afflict the comfortable. You got to change this.
To make people uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Make good trouble, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Meanwhile, I see certain pockets of the country where I feel good when I leave these pockets. When I go to Birmingham, Alabama, when I go to Atlanta, Georgia, people are extremely educated from one end of town to the other. And I feel good. I mean, I feel like the country is so different just being there than being in areas where people are afraid to go out and socialize with others. I see a good mixture of people having fun with each other in both Atlanta and in Birmingham. It's nice to be able to go to the restaurants and see a total mix and not just all be one-sided. It's nice to go to the entertainment centers and have a total mix and everybody just getting along and helping everybody. I've seen people accidentally fall down and people of color helping white people get up and white people helping people of color get up, and they see somebody not feeling well and everybody's just there for everybody. And I so much wish that culture can be brought to more sections of the United States. That it's not, then unfortunately. And I think that I don't know what I think. I really hope that more people just can find and be part of what needs to be done in society and government, in your business, Sheila, to help make this change. So how do we get more people involved even in what you're doing? I mean, I know you need help out there to get more people out there to help you. So how do we do that?
Each one, reach one, teach one. I keep preaching it, no matter who I speak to. They in turn tell it to other people. You've got to start hammering away at it and keep the same message. And it's about all of us. If you can help the most vulnerable of us, the sickest of us, you help everybody.
Right.
So we've got to deliver the message in a holistic way. So it's not about Black people and Latino and Asian. It's about humans. It's about humanity.
Exactly.
Humane medicine. And you're right, Stuart. I see the same things you are. I mean, I'm not an optimist about this or a pessimist, but I'm a realist. Okay.
Right.
I understand you got to work with what you have, where you're at, and keep moving the needle. You're a change agent. Dr. Williams is most definitely a change agent. And there are many like that. We're not alone. So we definitely have just got to keep the foot on the gas.
Yep. I need another 40 years so that way I have time to do it all.
I don't think any of us has time to do it all, but certainly we do our best.
Absolutely.
Yes. And we're going to keep on trying to do this. And I look forward to 2024. We're going to find a new way to do this program. Okay. We're going to find a new way to do this. I don't know how, but I'm going to try to find a new way to get more people involved. I think if we make it partially live, that if we can do it all, get it live in one location, like what we're trying to do in February, maybe add more components to it and get more people involved with the program. I think that more people will be involved and can speak up and get more people that they know involved with the program. So I just think that the more people can learn from these types of programs, the better it could possibly be in the long run for more people to be friendly with each other and work with each other.
Absolutely.
I'm probably saying the wrong words, but that's because I'm afraid to say the right words.
No, you're doing great.
You're doing very well. No problem.
Okay. So, Dr. Williams and Sheila, I want to thank you again for being part of tonight's program. And again, we look forward to 2024. Again, I want to say happy holidays to all and be safe out there and just do what you know is right and help others do what you know is right.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank
Have
you.
a great night, everybody.
Have a great one, everybody.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye-bye.